Hello guys, and welcome to another video. And this one is going to be a bit of a different video to the usual ones that I put up on this channel, because we're going to be taking a look at another player's build. That's Ben's Pathfinder build that he's been playing recently. And we're going to be discussing all of the defensive layers that went into creating one of the tankiest characters that I've seen recently. So let's get started. Alright, so here's the path of building for this Pathfinder build. And this is a Reap Pathfinder. The damage here is incorrect, including the overlaps from Awakened Spell Cascade. We're probably looking at around 130, maybe 125 million DPS, something like that. And this is an original Sin build, but this video isn't about the damage that this build deals, which is ridiculous in its own right, to be honest. No, this video is going to be a look at the defenses of the build and break down what makes this build so incredibly tanky. Just look at these effective health numbers. That's against an Uber Shaper Slam. So why is this character so strong defensively? Well, this comes down to having insane defensive layering. Let's talk about each layer, beginning with spell suppression. So spell suppression is achieved by taking the inveterate wheel on the tree, along with the Magebane keystone, and we have 3 tier 1 spell suppression rolls on each of the helmet, gloves, and boots, along with the Grace Watcher's Eye modifier to provide spell suppression chance while Grace is active. This brings the character to just above 100% chance to suppress spell damage, and with the bonus from Inveterate, that's 53% less damage taken from spell hits. But not everything in the game is a spell, so what can we do about attacks? Well, maximum resistance is fantastic against that if the damage is elemental, and so this character is using a melding setup along with tattoos to gain 90% all elemental resistances. And this is achieved in 3 parts. So first of all, we're using a melding with -4 to all maximum resistances, which means the character needs to make up a total of 19% to 1 maximum elemental resistance to reach 90% to all elemental resistances. The first of those 3 parts is using a new tech with tattoos and the new Warrior's Tail unique jewel, which doubles the effect of tattoos in its radius. Combined with 4 tattoos of the Arrow Hongui Makanga, which grant +1% to maximum cold resistance each, these tattoos require having only a single connection to work, which is why you can see them branching off of the ends of each of these paths here. And because the Warrior's Tail jewel is in the radius, each of these grants 2% to maximum cold resistance for a total of 8% to maximum cold resistance. Next up is another new tech with tattoos using a different unique jewel. That's Unnatural Instinct. This jewel grants the bonuses of all unallocated small passive skills in its small radius. Now, the Arrow Hongui Makanga tattoos only require a maximum of 1 connection to prevent their bonuses from being active when more than 1 connection is there. But they don't actually require any connections at all to function if you can somehow allocate them using a different method, such as with the Unnatural Instinct jewel. So this jewel makes use of that interaction, and you can see these 4 tattoos here are all allocated because they're within the radius of the Unnatural Instinct. So this setup right here provides another 4% to maximum cold resistance for a total of 12%. The remaining 7% is coming from Purity of Ice, which is level 23, granting a baseline 5% to maximum cold resistance, which is then scaled up by Aura Effect to provide a total of 7% maximum cold resistance. And all of these combined together grant a total of 19% to maximum cold resistance, which when combined with the -4 melding of the flesh, gets the character to 90% all elemental resistances. So that's pretty good. Cap spell suppression, 90% elemental resistances, the character is already really tanky. What's next? Well, some damage is going to be physical, and especially those physical hits that are not spells, the character has no defense against them. So the next best thing to deal with that damage is going to be damage taken as, and this character has a total of 98% of physical damage taken from hits, taken as elemental damage instead. That's 50% coming from the Lightning Coil, which grants 50% of that damage taken as lightning damage, then 16% from the helmet, that's 8% from a crafted Corel modifier, and 8% from an Eater of Worlds implicit. Both of those are taken as fire damage. and then 5% from a Lethal Pride notable passive skill modifier, that one's taken as fire damage, and 27% comes from the Taste of Hate flask with a max roll and 83% flask effect, for a total of 98% of physical damage taken from hits, which is then shifted and taken as elemental damage instead. This means the character pretty much doesn't take any physical damage from hits, and all originating physical and elemental hit damage are taken as elemental damage, which is important for the next layer, that's elemental flasks. Now, we already mentioned the Taste of Hate, which provides 27% of physical damage from hits taken as cold damage, but it also grants a flat 20% less cold damage taken all of the time, which is also scaled up by flask effect. So with 83% flask effect, that's 36% less cold damage taken all of the time. Ben is also using a ruby flask and a topaz flask, but these flasks have the benefit of not being unique, which means they gain the extra 30% flask effect from the Pathfinder Ascendancy, and they can also have different mods as well. And with the Alchemist modifier, the flasks gain a further 25% effect, which brings the flask's less damage taken modifier for both fire and lightning damage up to a ridiculous 47%. That's 47% less fire and lightning damage taken all of the time. And next up we've got another flask, that's the Life Flask, which is a really important part of this build. We'll see why in a moment. And due to the Pathfinder's Master Surgeon Ascendancy notable, this Life Flask is basically like an enduring Life Flask. It's always there and it's always up. Thanks to all of the Flask effect and life recovery from Flask modifiers, and the use of many different tribe tattoos along with the ancestral tattoo of bloodlines which boosts life recovery rate, this Divine Life Flask is recovering about 5,000 life per second all of the time, which is very important for the next defensive layer, that's Progenesis and Petrified Blood. Alright, so this is where the EHP of the build is about to skyrocket. The Progenesis unique flask prevents a portion of hit damage, which is then lost over 4 seconds following the hit. By default, this is 25%, which is then scaled up by flask effect. With 83% flask effect, the Progenesis flask will prevent 45% of the damage taken from hits, and that 45% is then lost over 4 seconds instead. Then, the character is also making use of Petrified Blood. Petrified Blood functions in a very similar way to Progenesis, but its buff only works when on low life. Ben is making use of an anomalous quality Petrified Blood, which prevents further damage from hits, but makes the character lose a higher percentage of the damage prevented over the following 4 seconds. Petrified Blood prevents all recovery above low life with the exception of life flasks, but the use of a life flask is this character's primary recovery method. When the character is on full life, Progenesis will function on its own to provide its damage prevention mechanic. Then, when the character is brought to 50% life or lower, Petrified Blood's buff will begin to work. The Progenesis buff and Petrified Blood's buff are not additive. First, Progenesis will work to prevent 45% of the damage of a hit, then Petrified Blood's buff will interact with the hit after that 45% has been prevented, preventing 45% of the remaining hit damage. Then 100% of the prevented damage from Progenesis and 138% of the prevented damage from Petrified Blood is lost over 4 seconds following the hit. This is where the very high life recovery from the Life Flask becomes very important. Lastly, Ben is making use of a new unique amulet, that's Defiance of Destiny. I've already done a video on this amulet on the channel. This unique amulet provides recovery based on missing unreserved life before an enemy hit would take place. With a max roll and life catalyst, this is 42% of missing unreserved life gained before the hit deals damage. Since Petrified Blood is active, recovery from Defiance of Destiny won't take place above 50% life. But the recovery gained from the amulet will include the missing unreserved life above 50% whenever life is lost below half life. This means that whenever the character is dropped below 50%, both Petrified Blood and Defiance of Destiny kick in to provide hit mitigation and recovery simultaneously. The character is also immune to elemental ailments thanks to ancestral vision combined with boot modifiers, and stun immune from the stun avoidance flask craft on the divine life flask combined with flask effect, and a stray tattoo of the Tessalio Tideshifter on the tree. So, to summarise, the character has capped spell suppression to provide 53% less damage taken from spell hits, 90% elemental resistances with capped chaos resistance, 98% of physical damage taken from hits shifted to be taken as elemental damage, a permanent 36% less cold damage taken, and 47% less fire and lightning damage taken, 5,000 life recovered per second, stun and elemental ailment immunity, 45% of damage taken from hits prevented, with a further 45% prevented from the resulting total while on low life, and hit-based instant life recovery based on missing life from Defiance of Destiny. So how do all of these defensive layers interact with each other? Let's say the character takes a spell hit that deals 10,000 physical damage. 50% of the physical damage is taken as lightning damage, 21% is taken as fire damage, and 27% is taken as cold damage. The remaining 2% is taken as physical damage. The damage that is taken as elemental damage is first reduced by the 90% elemental resistances. Then the fire and lightning damage is lessened by the 47% less fire and lightning damage taken on the ruby and topaz flasks. And the cold damage is lessened by 36% less cold damage taken on the Taste of Hate flask. The damage that is taken as physical is reduced by armor. Ben has about 1000 armor, which reduces this 200 by about 50%. Then, because the hit was a spell, it's subject to spell suppression's 53% less damage taken as well. So the character would take 48 physical damage, 125 lightning damage, 81 cold damage, and 52 fire damage for a total of 306 damage. On full life, Progenesis would prevent 138 damage, so the character would take 168 damage immediately, and 138 damage over 4 seconds. If the character was on low life, Progenesis would prevent 138 damage, then Petrified Blood would prevent 76 damage, so the character would take 92 damage immediately, then take 243 damage over 4 seconds. If the character was also below 50% life, they would recover 42% of missing unreserved life prior to the hit dealing damage, up to the maximum recoverable threshold of 50% from Petrified Blood. With all of these layers combined, this character is nearly immortal. Well, nearly. The character was a hardcore trade character and it did die in the Delve Mines around depth 1200. It died to pretty much one of the only weaknesses of the build, that being the rare monster modifier which causes flasks to lose charges. Of course, this build is completely built around flasks. You can see here when the flasks are turned off, the character has barely any effective health at all. Ben encountered one of these flask siphoner mobs in Delve, and this caused Ben's life last to fall off, and the staggered damage from Progenesis and Petrified Blood quickly killed the character thereafter, due to the lack of life recovery. Ben's advice? If you see a flask siphoner when you're playing Pathfinder, just log out. Hopefully this video was useful to showcase just how powerful defensive layering can be. Let me know if you guys like this type of video so I can consider doing more of this type of build analysis in the future. Shout out of course to my channel members for your support, I appreciate you guys. And if you'd like to support the growth of this channel, you can by becoming a channel member. Click the join button below to find out more. And thank you very much for watching. As always, stay tuned and stay safe.